Welcome home. We are WNST. Towson, Baltimore. Baltimore Positive. We're positively getting the Crab Cake Tour back out on the road, but we're taking a little break from all of this, man. I got anniversaries this week. My mom's birthday's this week. We've got concerts galore happening everywhere. And football back out on the field and a first place baseball team. Lots and lots of things happening. When we do rev up the engines, we're going to have Prince George's County Executive Angela Alserbrooks, who is running on your November punch ticket for senator, and we'll look forward to talking to her as well as Larry Hogan. But we're going to start things with her on August the 13th. We're going to do that at State Fair in Catonsville. All of it brought to you by the Maryland Lottery, the Gold Rush Sevens doublers, bringing these out onto the streets. Our friends at Liberty Pure Solutions, keeping my water crystal clear, whether I'm drinking from my orange colored glass or my purple shaded glasses. Also, our friends at Jiffy Lube Multicare, keeping the car oiled up and more. Stop by your Jiffy Lube and make sure you stop at Baltimore Positive. Grab yourself a coupon before you do that as well. Luke Jones has been driving back and forth. He will be reuniting with Manny Machado this weekend, as wonder what costumes the Padres are going to come to town with. Hopefully they wear something relatively traditional just to honor Tony Gwynn. Baseball on the weekend, but football during the week, and football while the Orioles are in Miami and traveling around. And do tell Lucas you're back from eating a lot of pizza in Wildwood, New Jersey, and now out onto the fields a couple of days. Not obscenely hot or weird. Some weird showers here and again been moving through, and it's sort of a interesting weather week, but also not 101, not what it was 2 weeks ago for sure.
It's been worse before. I can remember some very hot afternoon practices in Westminster. Certainly some very hot days in Owings Mills over the years. This opening week hasn't been too bad. A lot of rain on Monday. That made for an interesting practice, and Rashad Bateman actually looking really good in the rain. So there's that. But just a weird start to training camp. I mean, in recent years, they've really been more deliberate in how they ramp up anyway. So the first 4 days of practice or so have felt more and more like OTAs, minicamp. And it's been even stranger with Lamar Jackson, with a little bit of an illness where he hasn't been out there these first few days. Look, we're 6 weeks out from Kansas City. Certainly not any angst over that, in terms of him missing a few practices, the 3.5 weeks into July, but it does make for a strange atmosphere. It certainly tamps down the buzz, certainly from the fans. I mean, as I was waiting by their tunnel where a lot of the players run out of the field house onto the practice field on, I guess it was Tuesday when I was doing that, you see all these youngsters wearing their number 8 Lamar Jackson jerseys, only to see Josh Johnson and Emory Jones and Devin Leary run out for the quarterbacks group as Lamar's still recovering.
Must be what it's like when LeBron's load management,
Right.
He comes to Utah once and you don't get to see him play or whatever.
I guess the only difference is hopefully, in those cases, sometimes families are dropping $2,000 to go see LeBron play, and he's not out there. In this case, it's just a
Hey, I'll say this as an old Phillies fan. Sometimes I would go up to Philadelphia to see like the business person special on Thursday, and Schmidt wouldn't play. You know what I mean? So there was a little bit of that going on too. But for the most part, it's a disappointment for the organization. Sure. Sure. In that way. And the football side of it is, it's July. That's why I'm not out on the internet, playing doctor on the internet to Lamar Jackson or whatever. We made some wisecracks about it the other day, but I don't, from a football perspective, it's one less day he can get injured for me.
Yeah, exactly. And again, assuming it's nothing overly serious. And look, I mean, he had COVID to start training camp in 21. I mean, is it, I'm not going to speculate about it. But it seems like it's something where he'll be back at some point in the near future, whether it is COVID or something else, who knows? But from a football standpoint, I don't think it's terribly consequential at the moment. I'd like to see Josh Johnson look a little bit better. He's really struggled. And there was even a moment on Tuesday where a couple of the guys in the secondary were saying, hey, stop holding on to the ball, because they can't hit the quarterback. And, you have the quarterback in a 7-on-7 drill holding the ball for 8 seconds. I mean, that's not very realistic. I guess it is for Lamar Jackson, the way he can dance around and everything. But point being, it's not a big deal from a football standpoint, of course. it is disappointing for the organization, just for the fans that are out there. You want to give them the full excitement. But I'll also point out those same fans who maybe were disappointed that Lamar didn't run out. They were really excited when Derrick Henry ran through the tunnel. So last year it was Odell Beckham who was getting the biggest pop other than Lamar Jackson. This year it's been Derrick Henry who gets the biggest pop with Lamar Jackson not out there these first few days. So
should have bought that Oilers jersey when I had the chance.
there you go. There you go. It's going to be in high demand now. But overall, other than Lamar, other than the Keaton Mitchells of the roster that are on, the PUP list or the non-football injury list, which, that they have a couple of the rookies, TJ Tampa and Adissa Isaac are on those lists for some pre-existing things that they had. But, they haven't had any major injuries the first few days. Knock on wood about that. They haven't really had anyone who has really tweaked anything. Ben Cleveland looked like he might have been struggling with the heat a little bit on Tuesday, but he even came back into doing reps and everything. So it's been, other than Lamar's absence, which is obviously a massive caveat, it's been a pretty quiet start to the week. But for me, I think maybe one of the more interesting early camp plots is Marlon Humphrey, and he talked on Tuesday. We've talked a lot about him. We talked a lot about him last year with him missing significant portions of 10 games and not really being available for the postseason. Missed the Houston game, played very little in that Kansas City game. Marlon Humphrey, this is a big year for him. He's going to have a $25 million cap number next year, and they just drafted Nate Wiggins, and they have Brandon Stevens going into a contract year. So I think one of the biggest things that really stood out to me when you hit the field for the first day of training camp is, how does everyone look body composition wise? Who looks bigger, who looks smaller, who looks bigger in the upper body, who's filled out a little bit, who's matured physically. If you're talking about some of these younger guys, Marlon Humphrey noticeably leaner, and even confirmed that right now he's about 10 pounds lighter than he had been the last couple years. And that was by design. He acknowledged that at his absolute best a few years back when he was playing his best football was probably, more 190, 195 rather than 200. It's not a dramatic difference, but this, Nestor, from having followed this up close for so long, that a few pounds, little bit of quickness, that goes a long way when you're talking about these athletes, these elite, unbelievable, best in the world athletes going up against each other, where you drop 5 pounds. That doesn't sound a lot to you or me as we're walking around as everyday civilians, but that can be a big deal on the football field. So,
especially in the fourth quarter.
Sure. So Humphrey,
one step. It's always one step, right?
Absolutely. So Humphrey looks healthier than he was last year. And, the thing I'll say about Humphrey, he's not that old. He's been around a long time, but keep in mind, this guy was not, I want to say he was not quite 21 when they drafted him. So he was a very young player when they drafted him in 2017. It's not as though he's 32 years old and on his last legs. I think if he can get himself healthy again, still has good football in front of him. I think when he played last year, when he was healthy last year, and look, availability is paramount, but I don't think he played so much poorly last year as much as he just wasn't available enough.
I would say unreliably.
Sure. And that's fair.
And I say stunk is that the position and what we paid for at that position,
sure,
he was not capable of playing at that level when he played and if he played. And for that reason, I can't go play, let's say, Jamar Chase and feel like I got a dude there.
Yeah.
The way that, look, Marlon Humphrey's personality aside, he's, a hell of a player. And in that hall of wherever McAllister, Jimmy Smith, even Starks, that what they could have, and I think Starks maximized his potential maybe more than injuries and other issues just limited the other guys to become Rod Woodson, right? To become, I don't know. Make up any of the top corners, Dion, whatever. I'm talking about with less flash. I'm just talking about a great, great player. Even Richard Sherman for, the period of time, like just Marlon was on that pace. And now we're like, well, where is it? I think with Ronnie Stanley, we don't feel like his physical ability and the age part of that, I think you still have a feeling that Marlon can play like he's 24.
I mean, I think he can. I'm not guaranteeing that that's going to happen. And in the meantime, he's got a $22.8 million cap number this year. Now, people were talking at the beginning of the offseason, could his roster spot be in danger? No. I mean, because his cap number, it would have been so prohibitive to cut him that,
I did the math on that real quick. That's like a $1.2 million a game. So I'm just throwing that out.
Sure,
Throwing that in there. Yeah.
I mean, and that's so that's the big question. He's got to play more like a $22 million corner. Now, granted, a $22 million corner in 2024 is a different value than what it was in 2020 because the salary cap continues to go up. And, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, at least in passing, more and more chatter now about an 18-game schedule and what that would mean for TV money and salary cap and player salaries and all of that. So these numbers continue to go up, right? I mean, even a quarterback. I mean, when Joe Flacco signed his big deal 11 years ago or whatever it was, it was unheard of to think that a quarterback would get $20 million. Now you think about a quarterback getting $20 million, and the first thing you say is what? Wow, if that guy's any good, he's really criminally underpaid. So we know how much the economics have shifted. But that said, if Marlon Humphrey's only going to be on the field 8, 9, 10 games, then this probably his last year as a Raven, especially having drafted Nate Wiggins. And, I think at the right price, at the right price point, something that makes sense, I think they'd like to keep Brandon Stevens if they can. So I think Marlon Humphrey's playing for his future in Baltimore. I don't think he's playing for his future in the NFL in the same way that maybe Ronnie Stanley's kind of a little bit more in that category in terms of you got to show you're still a starting caliber left tackle. I think Humphrey's still absolutely, clearly a quality corner when he's right, but he's got to.
He moves into a position where he is a suspect more than a prospect at 22 million and can't afford anything to go wrong this year for him physically. And then if nothing goes wrong physically, then he still has to go out and prove that he can do it at that elite level, but he really needs good health and better luck, quite frankly.
No question. I mean, he's a value concern right now. We tend to look at players in terms of can they play or not? Are they good or are they not? Are they a Pro Bowl player? Are they average player? Are they a backup? I mean, you kind of always use those broad categories, but he falls into the category right now of someone that I think is still very much capable of playing at a high level, but availability and value are now concerns for him. So he's got a lot to prove this year. That's why I think it was noticeable of him kind of meeting the moment a little bit and recognizing, hey, I've got to get myself in a little bit better shape if that will help me in terms of the foot surgery I had last year, the calf injuries that I had later in the season that really hindered my ability to just stay on the field, let alone play at a high level. So, I think he's recognized that. Now we'll see how it goes. This is also, 'tis the season. I'm in the best shape of my life. And then, 6 weeks later, then the bullets are flying for real. And then suddenly you're talking about someone who's hurt or not playing well again. So
we don't talk a lot about Marlon Humphrey around here. And, guys that I don't miss being thrown out, being treated like I was treated by him. I'll be writing about that on Labor Day when I make my own little declaration of independence. But in regard to him and in regard to you saying he stepped up in front of the microphones, come on, dude, it wasn't always that way. Media chairman. And I would also say the other part of that for him is, and this is to shame DaCosta a little bit because Eric and I had a lot of conversations about this when we would fly together and eat together and dine together and coffee together. And I've had breakfast, lunches, and dinners and late nights with Eric DaCosta over all my time. And he and I talked a lot about leadership and about Tony La Russa. When your best people are your best players or your best people, that's when you can win. And that's not an indictment on Marlon, but I think there's a point for him at $22 million where you're like, oh, I'm a leader around here. I guess I better lead. I mean, that's what Suggs did when everybody disappeared, right? It's like, oh, you're the leader. And I'm like, psst, psst, Eric, he can't be the leader. He's not a leader. So he's a narcissist. So being a leader, and you thought Mark Ingram was a little bit of a pretend leader, right? Like I thought he was more of a real leader. I think Matt Burke could be a leader for certain people who believe a certain way, and I think Ray Lewis could be a leader for other people who other people didn't feel led by him. So I think there's all of that. But for Marlon at 22 million, and for Ronnie Stanley at his number, and for Lamar at his number, I mean Lamar's the leader. He has to be at his, and Derrick Henry is, exerted his personality and his, hey, I might be going to the Hall of Pretty Good. Roquan Smith certainly has been alpha dog running into this. Kyle Hamilton's their best player. I mean, we've discussed, Lamar aside, but their dynamic player, their X factor on defense. And then there are the Matabikes and the Linderbaums and the Mark Andrews, accomplished football players around here. And amidst all of that, I think this is an admission, and your admission at least, with Marlon at least stepping up next to Chad Steele or Patrick, whoever he was next to him. Marisol, I see the pictures. Hi, everyone. Miss you. But I don't miss Marlon Humphrey. And having him step up and say, I'm a leader. I'm team captain. I've been here for all the losses. I was here before any of these cats were here. I remember Joe Flacco. That's how far back I go. I would say for him, I sense that disappointment when he's wearing sunglasses when they get their ass beat and they shouldn't against the Chargers and the Titans. I was around for that. Chad used to give me a press credential back when I was in the media, and I sensed a real. I know why Eric likes him. You know what I mean? I get what that is, but I know why we never got it from that perspective, and whatever his transgressions were in whatever ways in Alabama, whatever the story comes out on the internet. But what I've seen and what I felt from the kid all along is that you're now asking him to be a leader. I'm not sure he's that cat. I just want him to get on the field and play at this point. They brought Earl Thomas in, a couple of years ago and said, meet Marlon, right? So Marlon, in and around all of this, has had a lot of disappointment in January, but up been on some great football teams. But I think he also knows he doesn't want to go play out the string for the Arizona Cardinals, making $14 million either. You know what I mean? I think he realizes this is a good situation for him, and this leadership thing that has fallen on him with Hamilton and Roquan Smith. He's around some really good football players here, man. This is a real opportunity for him to win a championship, and I know how important that is to him because I saw the disappointment when he lost.
Yeah, and look, I mean, is Marlon Humphrey the defensive leader? No. I mean, you could have made that argument maybe 3 years ago, but I mean, Roquan Smith instantly became the leader of that defense. I think Kyle Hamilton is rapidly becoming that kind of guy, albeit still at a very young age, still entering his third year. I mean, it's wild to think the stature that Kyle Hamilton has already gained for himself through nothing that's artificial or seems insincere or disingenuous. He's just, one, he's a heck of a football player. And two, like he handles himself in a way that is wise beyond his years. You hear Kyle Hamilton talk, you would think he's 30. He doesn't look 30. I mean, obviously he's this physical specimen, but looks like a baby in the face a little bit, I guess. But it's kind of crazy to think he's only been around 3 years. I mean, that's why I was even talking to someone the other day that, I mean, not suggesting he's anywhere close to this yet. Let's be very clear about this. This isn't Luke firing off a hot take, and he's got a long, 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 long way to go. I think this is the kind of guy who has the makeup and the talent and the unique skill set to be in that conversation of, okay, Ray Lewis and Ed Reed are kings of this organization defensively, right? And always will be. I mean, not just Hall of Famers, but elite Hall of Famers. I think Kyle Hamilton, when it's all said and done, has the potential to be not that far below those guys. Let's put it that way, and potentially be right there with Suggs and Nada and guys like that, and maybe better than that. I think he's got that kind of ability. I think he's got that kind of head on his shoulders. So you asked me about Marlon Humphrey. Roquan Smith, leader. Kyle Hamilton, emerging leader. Not a rah-rah guy, but emerging leader. So that's where I think if you're Marlon Humphrey, there's not as much pressure through that element,
But he
right?
got
To
paid
be
first and got paid the most.
He did, but at the same time, Nestor, you also know that the Ravens had paid plenty of guys over the years that aren't necessarily great leaders. They that doesn't mean they're you want them to be jerks or bad people, but they've paid guys and they've had great players on their roster over the years who weren't the guys that were doing the speech in the huddle. They weren't necessarily the guy that was doing the most talking in the meeting room, but they were just great players. Marlon Humphrey at this point, I don't think they need his leadership nearly as much as maybe that was an expectation of him when he signed that deal 4 years ago. They need him to stay on the field. They just need him to be on the field and be a good player. I
Right.
think
Being
when
that kind of player would be a leader, to your point.
sure, and that's
Sure.
fine, right? And look, I mean,
Well, especially for
no,
the young kid they just drafted, Wiggins.
sure. I mean, no one wants to get hurt. We all understand that. I mean, I have lots of empathy for Ronnie Stanley in the fact that he tore up his ankle 2 days after he got paid. I'm glad for his sake he got paid before that happened.
And to your point, he was on a pace to go to the Hall of Fame at that point.
I mean, I don't know if Stanley, I don't know if I would have said that, but he was certainly a guy who was looking like he was going to be a multi-time Pro Bowler who maybe if he did that long enough, yeah, sure, he could have been in that
win 2 or 3
conversation.
Super Bowls with Lamar, you get thought of a little differently.
Sure. I mean, I think he's someone who had the potential to rise to the heights of not a Jonathan Ogden, but let's say a Marshall Yanda, where, by the way, after this year, Marshall Yanda and Terrell Suggs will be Hall of Fame eligible. So we'll see how that plays out. But, I just think with Humphrey, stay on the field, get right, be the kind of player you were a couple years ago. I mean, it's not as though this guy's had a 5-year rapid decline or anything like that. I mean, in 21, he tore his pec in mid-December, I guess it was. And, last year, of course, he had the foot surgery in August, came back after 4 games, I think it was, scuffled a little bit early, then seemed to get himself going and playing at a higher level, then hurt his calf, and then came back and hurt his calf again. So, it's just a kind of a lost season for him. But I think for the Ravens, for their defense, for this secondary, for Zach Orr as the new defensive coordinator, especially with some of the questions as far as the pass rush and specifically the edge rush, they want this secondary to remain as dynamic as it can be and positionless as it can be in terms of moving guys around. I mean, with the signing of Eddie Jackson, a former Pro Bowl safety from the Bears, they really feel that they have a lot of movable and interchangeable parts in the back end of that defense. But I think Kyle Hamilton and Marlon Humphrey still feel so critical to being able to do that in terms of moving those guys to the nickel, maybe in Hamilton's case, playing some dime. I think they have every opportunity to really confuse opposing quarterbacks. And I think that's something under Mike Macdonald, they took to another level, after success under Wink Martindale, but that was a little bit different. Wink really leaned on his corners to be on an island a whole lot, whereas Macdonald and I think Zach Orr, you're going to see them continue to play a little more zone and not put quite as much pressure on their corners on the outside. But that said, you need dynamic players who can do different things and drop and show different looks and know what to do and have the proper alignment and assignment and technique and all of that. So I think Marlon Humphrey, when he's right, can still be a fascinating chess piece. Not the Kyle Hamilton unbelievable chess piece, but he can still be another guy that, hey, you can move Humphrey into the nickel and you can now put Nate Wiggins on the outside, who I think is going to be a really good player sooner rather than later for them. So, there are just so many possibilities, but you want to have options. You can't be multiple if you don't have depth, right? I mean, and certainly a healthy Marlon Humphrey alleviate some of that pressure on their other corners. It puts you in a position where you're not forced to play Nate Wiggins as a rookie. You want him to force the issue, right? You want him to demand he gets on the field based on his play, not to have to throw him out there because Humphrey's hurt or, Marcus Williams is hurt on the back end of the defense. So Hamilton can't play the nickel, they're in a position where I think they've really improved their depth. They even added Daryl Worley back to the picture as far as another depth piece for them at safety. So that secondary that you and I were talking about as recently as a few weeks ago, with the number 3 safety and all that, it's in way better shape. But I still
the Darby's and the Millettes and those kinds of players that come in, that's where Eddie Jackson comes in, right?
Sure.
I mean, this is where all of a sudden you bring a guy in and I'm Googling him up and saying, all right, well, they think he's got football left in him. And
Yeah,
we've seen a lot of that around here over years of them bringing pieces into the secondary that stick for a period of time and play well.
sure. And I'm glad you mentioned them, because I'd be remiss if I didn't mention all this talk about Hamilton at the nickel or Marlon Humphrey at the nickel and Wiggins on the outside. One of the best players of camp going back to the spring and even starting the first week of camp, Arthur Millette's playing good football. And I don't say that in terms of like, oh, he's going to become a star for the defense. I say that in terms of this is another guy that with all this depth and all these interchangeable parts, he played good football for them last
And
year.
he's a
And they
veteran
re-signed
guy
him.
who gets it, who might actually be improving. I mean, Marvin would always say that to me. The goal is for these guys to get better. They do get a little older and maybe they get a little slower,
Yeah.
but they're never in the wrong spot.
Right,
I
right.
mean,
And Millette's 31, so no one would call him an ascending player, but he's a good fit for what they want to do. He can blitz from the nickel spot. He's physical enough for a player that's not very big,
and also a guy that doesn't get confused by complexity, which is,
sure.
I mean, the intellectual level of what these defenses are doing. For anybody that listens to this show or follows what we do, there's a whole nerd culture out there for how difficult this job is. And something that I had a lot of respect for the first day that Marvin dropped the playbook from the Pittsburgh Steelers 95 linebackers onto my desk and said, here, interpret this. And I'm saying, oh, turns out I'm no Kevin Green.
Sure.
And that's when his eyes lit up. He's like, oh, now you're ready to learn, are you? And that's when I was like humbled for life on all of this and for all how smart Kyle Hamilton and Ray Lewis and all of these guys are, and Joe Flacco and Lamar Jackson, and seeing the game at the speed that befuddles all of us. And I think there's something about being 31 and still having some wheels and knowing what you're doing far more than when you were 24 or 25, because I've experienced that. So have you. That when you're like, hey, I can figure this out. If Millette's one of those guys, Kyle Van Noy was one of those guys. Clowney finally got some health about him and probably lived his life a little differently than he did in Houston the day he was drafted and was anointed a Hall of Famer, and then actually had to go out and do it and found out how hard it was going to be.
Yeah, and to bring it full circle, because we started our conversation talking about Marlon Humphrey. Marlon Humphrey's 28 now, and with him dropping some weight and making some admissions that, hey, I've got to, I can't handle how what I put into my body nutrition wise and how I work out. I can't do the same thing that I did at age 23 and expect the results I got at age 23.
Well, look,
so
5 years ago, he thought
too.
he was going to the Hall of Fame, right? He
Right.
did, right? Now he's on that, I got to keep my job, but I could still go to the Hall of Fame too. I mean, because he's been good enough, right? So that's, and he wants to win a championship. I have no doubt about that with Marlon Humphrey, none.
I mean, all these guys want to win, but it also comes down to luck, durability, and also adjusting as you get older. The absolute best players, Ray Lewis recognized when he got to age 29, 30, 31, because he had been around Shannon Sharp and Rod Woodson, and he learned, oh, I probably got to get a little bit lighter. I've got to be a little bit tighter with my nutrition. Probably need to change up my workout regimen as I get older, because your body, you got to shock the system. All those different things. I mean, so much of this, we talk about this a lot in baseball, more so game of adjustments, right? You hear that adjustment word probably 25 times every single baseball broadcast. I mean, you just do. But it applies to football. It applies to other sports. As you get older, to your point, even when you're just a regular old civilian, you hit age 30 and you can't eat as much pizza, right? And not look at the scale and get your feelings hurt, right? I mean,
I used to have Bam Morris out at the barn on Monday night ordering, fried whatever, right?
Yeah.
After the game, right? And now you see Derrick Henry spending $250,000 on his nutrition.
He is, man, Derrick Henry is the exception with that. I mean, anyone who had a chance to see Dan Pompei's article at The Athletic.
By the way, Dan and I are texting right now. Dan's like, I'm trying to figure out how to get him on the show. So Dan's one of my oldest friends. Yes.
But there's a perfect example. Derrick Henry, when he was at Alabama, when he was his first couple years with the Titans, he even talked about this the other day. He was eating chicken wings and stuff like that. You can get away with that when you're 22. We all remember being 22 and you could eat whatever the heck you wanted and you didn't put on any LBs. And now it's like you have a bowl of ice cream and you're like, you're kind of peeking at the scale a couple days later.
Oh, you have a whole bowl? You
Yeah,
must be going to
exactly.
Wise. I mean, I just had a little
Exactly.
cone, man, and I'm paying for it. Our friends at Planet Fitness, need to get you in there. Luke Jones can be found at Baltimore Luke. We can belabor this. We're gonna talk so much football around here. Bah, we're gonna be puking purple before it's all over with. And it's only July. So let's take a time out from anything else. Any other observations you want to throw in here before we,
No,
Marlon Humphrey doesn't want me on his podcast anymore.
well, we'll save it for our next conversation. To your point, we're still 2 weeks out from the first preseason game where the starters aren't going to play anyway. So we've got plenty to talk about. But yeah, again, Marlon Humphrey, leaner, healthy,
Get
and a
Lamar
huge
back
year
on the
for him.
field. Let's get
Get
that
Lamar
in
back
there.
on the field. Sure. Yeah,
Is that
absolutely.
good?
That's number one. But again, it's July 24th, 25th, whatever. Plenty of time, 6 weeks out from the season opener. So very much a hurry up and wait kind of feeling if you're a fan.
I just want to say this publicly that you should have gone to the Foo Fighters on Tuesday night instead of worrying about the Reds. But listen, God bless you. You can tape the game. You know what I mean? Like, you can watch the game in the morning if you want. And like, Dave Grohl won't be there in the morning. Maybe one day he will be, but who knows? But so for all of you out there this week, Luke's double dipping. They don't let me in, so he has to do both. So he happily does both, and I guess I unhappily sit here and watch. Not when it's Ben McDonald or Jim Palmer, but I do like the broadcast. But go watch some baseball. We're a long way out on football. That's my point. Go watch the first place Orioles, and we'll worry about the AFC defending North #1 seed Derrick Henry, because I've been telling you about Derrick Henry forever. So when they have the parade that I'm locked out of in February, just know that it came from me, Derrick Henry. Okay, right?
There you go. There you go.
Never let it be said that wasn't all in on Derrick Henry. So now that you've been impressed by his dining, I gotta at some point I'm gonna revisit that Oiler jersey thing here. Luke can be found at Baltimore Luke. You can find me August 13th at State Fair. I'm wearing my Coco shirt. I want to give Marcel and everybody down at Coco some love. I have been craving those ridiculous coconut shrimp, so I got to get over there for those. We're going to have a crab cake tour stop there. We have a new sponsor that's an old sponsor that, I mean, probably had my first pizza at Pizza John's in 1974, like 75, somewhere in there. And they're back with us. So we're just pleased. I got to get my Pizza John's cup back out now. You'll see it out on our social media. I got my first, it's not really a Hawaiian pizza. I don't know, maybe call it Venezuelan pizza. I don't know, but pepperoni, pineapple, and imported ham. They import it from outside of Essex. So get over to Pizza John's. We're going to be doing a crab cake tour stop down there. Get the French fries with the gravy. Despite with Luke and Eddie George, or Eddie, I just call Derrick Henry Eddie George. Oh my God, I am flipping back to the Oilers. Despite what Derrick Henry or even Shannon Sharp would tell you, it's okay to go to Coco's and eat the fried coconut shrimp because the crab cake comes broiled, but it is kind of big. I'm Nestor. We're WNST. Back for more Baltimore Positive. Stay with us.